Hey everyone! Tonight we find ourselves standing on the edge of a world both ancient and strangely familiar, a world of intense devotion, incredible skill, and stakes so high they're almost unimaginable. We're journeying back in time, deep into the heart of Mesoamerica, to witness one of the oldest and most enigmatic sporting traditions known to humankind, the Mesoamerican ball game. Imagine the humid air, thick with the scent of copal incense and damp earth, the distant sounds of drums, and the murmur of a crowd anticipating something truly momentous. You're about to step into an arena where the line between sport, ritual, and cosmic drama was not just blurred, but perhaps never existed at all. And let's be honest, given the protective gear weighed more than a modern bowling ball, and the losing team often faced a rather permanent retirement, you probably wouldn't have survived this particular after-school activity. So before you get cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly helps these journeys continue. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see our community spread across the globe. Now switch off your lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You feel the cool, damp air of the early morning clinging to your skin, a stark contrast to the warmth you imagine the sun will bring in a few hours. You're standing just outside a structure that seems to pull the very shadows into its depths, a Mesoamerican ball court. It's not like any stadium you've ever seen. This one is long and narrow, shaped like a capital I, with imposing slanted walls rising on either side. The stone is ancient, weathered by centuries of sun and rain, yet it emanates a powerful presence. You run a hand along its surface. It's surprisingly smooth in some places, rough and pitted in others, almost like it's breathing history. The silence of this pre-dawn moment is profound, broken only by the distant chirping of unseen insects and the soft rustle of leaves in the surrounding jungle. But you know, with a certainty that settles deep in your bones, that this place has witnessed thunderous roars, the thud of a solid rubber ball, the grunts of exertion, and perhaps the final prayers of men whose fates were decided within these very walls. Historians call this game by many names, depending on the culture and the era. Olamalistli in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, or pits in classic Maya. Evidence of it stretches back over 3,000 years, making it one of the first organized sports in human history. Think about that for a moment. While other parts of the world were just beginning to figure out basic farming on a large scale, people here were already constructing specialized arenas for a complex, highly skilled athletic contest. Ball courts have been unearthed from the arid lands of what is now Arizona, all the way down through Mexico and into Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and even Nicaragua. It was a cultural cornerstone, as widespread and significant as, say, football or soccer is today, but infinitely more intertwined with the cosmic and spiritual beliefs of its players and spectators. You take a few tentative steps into the playing alley. It's surprisingly narrow. The walls on either side of you slope upwards and outwards, and you can imagine how the ball would rebound off them at unpredictable angles. Some later courts, particularly those built by the Maya and Aztec, would feature large stone hoops or rings set high on these walls. Getting the heavy ball through one of those was an act of incredible skill, a rare feat that could sometimes win the game outright and earn the player legendary status. Though honestly, aiming a 4 kilogram or 9 pound solid rubber projectile through a vertically placed stone donut using only your hips or thighs sounds less like a sporting achievement and more like a recipe for a hernia. You can almost hear the collective gasp of the ancient crowd, a sound that would have echoed dramatically in this stone enclosure. The ground beneath your feet is packed earth, meticulously leveled. You can almost feel the vibrations of countless games played here. What kind of individuals would have dared to compete in such a demanding environment? Were they celebrated athletes, revered for their prowess, or were they something more? The answer, like many things about this ancient game, is complex. In some societies, it seems the players were highly trained professionals, perhaps even from elite families, their skills honed over years of practice. They were the superstars of their day, their movements fluid and powerful, their understanding of the game profound. Imagine the best athletes you know, then add an extra layer of ritual significance and the constant looming possibility of a very, very serious outcome. You try to picture them, adorned not in lightweight jerseys, but in heavy protective gear. Around their waists, they would have worn thick leather or wooden yokes, U-shaped contraptions designed to protect their organs from the impact of that unforgiving rubber ball. These yokes could weigh over 30 pounds. Can you imagine trying to leap and dive with that kind of weight strapped to your midsection? It's like trying to play volleyball with a small child clinging to your waist. Not exactly conducive to agility. Then there were other pieces of equipment, like palmas and hachas, which were often elaborately carved stone or wooden objects attached to the yokes, possibly for added protection, or perhaps for ceremonial purposes, or even to help direct the ball. Scholars still debate their exact function, with some suggesting the hachas, often shaped like human heads or animals, were purely symbolic, while others think they might have been used to strike the ball in specific, controlled ways. One thing's for sure, they wouldn't have made the game any easier. You might also see players with knee pads, and perhaps even a kind of glove or handstone, though the rules generally forbade using hands directly on the ball. Their bodies would be painted, often with symbols representing deities or cosmic forces, transforming them from mere athletes into living embodiments of a larger mythological drama. The air would be thick with the smell of their exertion, the sheen of sweat on their skin under the sun that would eventually bake this court. Let's talk about that ball. It wasn't your friendly neighborhood Spalding. This was a solid sphere of natural latex rubber, sourced from specific trees in the tropical lowlands. The Mesoamericans were pioneers in rubber processing, and some evidence suggests they might have even stumbled upon a rudimentary form of vulcanization, mixing latex with the juice of the morning glory vine to achieve different degrees of bounciness and durability. It's a weird sidebar detail, isn't it? That these ancient cultures might have been playing with something akin to a super ball long before Charles Goodyear officially figured out vulcanization. Those balls were heavy, dense, and could cause serious injury. A direct hit to an unprotected head or torso could be fatal. This wasn't a game of gentle taps. It was a high-impact bruising encounter. The objective of the game, in its most basic form, appears to have been to keep the ball in play using only the hips, the thighs, and sometimes the upper arms or chest, and to propel it towards the opponent's end of the court, or in later versions, through those intimidating stone hoops. The exact rules likely varied across different cultures and time periods. Some accounts suggest that if the ball touched the ground too many times, it was a fault. Imagine the agility required, the core strength needed to pivot and strike that heavy projectile with just your hip, sending it flying towards a teammate or careening off those sloped walls. It was a dance of power and precision, a violent ballet played out in a sacred space. The players would have been bruised, battered, and utterly exhausted by the end of a match. Modern attempts to replicate the game with similar equipment highlight just how incredibly athletic and resilient these ancient players must have been. Most of us would probably tap out after the first 5 minutes, or the first time that 9-pound rubber cannonball came whistling past our ear. But why go through all this? Why develop such a demanding and dangerous sport? The truth is, the Mesoamerican ball game was far more than just entertainment. It was deeply embedded in the religious and cosmological worldview of these cultures. The ball itself was often seen as a symbol of the sun, the moon, or other celestial bodies, and its movement across the court mirrored the perceived journeys of these heavenly objects. The court, then, became a liminal space, a threshold between the earthly realm and the supernatural world, where humans could interact with and influence the gods. Think of it as a cosmic reenactment, a way to participate in the ongoing struggle between light and darkness, life and death. Each game was a story, a narrative played out with human actors, reflecting the grand myths of creation, destruction, and renewal. For example, in the Mayan Popol Vuh, their sacred creation myth, the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, are challenged to a ball game by the lords of Xibalba, the underworld. Their victory over the forces of death is a central theme, and the ball game is the chosen arena for this epic contest. So when you see players on the court, they might not just be athletes, they could be personifying these very hero twins, or perhaps their divine opponents. This mainstream historical fact, the deep connection to creation myths like that of the hero twins, underscores that this was never just a game for funsies. It was serious, sacred business. The outcomes of these games could have profound implications. Sometimes they were used for divination, the result seen as a message from the gods, perhaps foretelling the success of a harvest or the outcome of a battle. In other instances, ball games were used to settle political disputes between rival city-states. Instead of a bloody war, leaders might agree to a high-stakes ball game, with the losers accepting the political consequences. It's a surprisingly civilized way to handle international relations, if you conveniently ignore the potential for human sacrifice tied to the outcome. Certainly more entertaining than endless trade negotiations, though perhaps with a slightly higher body count, depending on the era and region. And that brings us to the most sensational and debated aspect of the game, human sacrifice. You've probably heard the stories. The idea that the losing team, or perhaps even the winning captain, was ritually sacrificed after the game is a persistent one. Iconography from various sites clearly depicts decapitation and other forms of sacrifice in association with the ball game. Skull racks, known as tzompantli, were sometimes erected near ball courts, displaying the skulls of sacrificial victims. It's a chilling thought that the ultimate price of defeat, or perhaps even the ultimate honor of victory, was death. However, historians still debate whether sacrifice was a universal component of every game, or if it was reserved for specific, ritually significant occasions. Was it always the losers? Some interpretations of certain carvings suggest that sometimes it might have been the captain of the winning team, offered as a prestigious gift to the gods. Others argue that captives taken in warfare were often forced to play, their sacrifice predetermined regardless of the game's outcome, making the game itself a ritualized prelude to their death. It's also possible that in many everyday games, sacrifice wasn't involved at all, and it was more about community, sport, and local rivalries, much like a village football match today, just with more aggressive equipment. The evidence is fragmentary and open to interpretation, a puzzle that scholars are still piecing together. It's likely the practice varied significantly across the vast geographical area and the immense time frame in which the game was played. Not every game ended with a trip to the great beyond, but the possibility certainly would have added a certain spice to the proceedings. You definitely want to be on your A game if your life literally depended on it. Forget playing for sheep stations. This was playing for your actual continued existence. As you stand there in the imagined silence of the court, you can almost hear the echoes, the roar of the crowd, not just as spectators of a sport, but as participants in a vital community ritual. The air would be electric with anticipation, with prayers, with the collective hopes and fears of an entire society pinned on the movements of a few brave individuals and a solid rubber ball. The rhythmic thud of the ball against flesh and stone, the shouts of the players, the gasps from the onlookers, these sounds would have filled this space, creating a symphony of human effort and divine drama. You look up at the sloping walls again. Imagine trying to send the ball through one of those stone rings, often decorated with intricate carvings of serpents or mythical creatures. These rings, a feature more prominent in the post-classic period, like at Chichen Itza, were not easy targets. They were usually quite high up, and scoring a goal this way was exceptionally rare. Some sources suggest that if a player managed this incredible feat, they were entitled to claim the jewels and cloaks of the spectators. Imagine the chaos. A sudden goal, and then a mad dash as the scoring hero tries to collect his winnings from a suddenly very agile and fast-moving audience. It's a humorous image, a brief moment of almost comical human interaction amidst the deadly seriousness of the ritual. One can only imagine the arguments, so no, you can't have my best jade necklace. That was a lucky shot. The details of daily life surrounding the game are also fascinating. Consider the preparation. These players didn't just roll out of bed and onto the court. Their training would have been rigorous, their diets controlled. They might have participated in fasting, prayer, and other purification rituals before a significant game. They were, in a sense, consecrated individuals, set apart for this sacred duty. And the courts themselves were not just playing fields, they were architectural marvels, often aligned with astronomical events, their very placement and orientation imbued with meaning. Building one was a significant community effort, a testament to the game's importance. One particularly curious detail found at some Olmec sites, The earliest known civilization to play the game are colossal stone heads. While not directly part of the ball court, these massive sculptures, some weighing many tons and depicting individuals with helmet like headgear, are thought by some to represent early ball players or rulers who were also prominent players. If true, it highlights the esteemed status these individuals held. It's like having giant statues of your favorite quarterback erected outside the stadium, only these were carved with stone tools and an incredible amount of labor. Talk about being a big head in the game. The social aspects are also intriguing. Did commoners play, or was it primarily an elite activity? Evidence suggests both. There were likely grand, state-sponsored games with all the ritual trappings, and probably smaller, more informal games played in local communities. It might have been a way for different social strata to interact, or for talented individuals to gain prestige. And what about women? Most of the depictions we have show male players, but there is some limited evidence, particularly from certain regions and periods, that women also played or at least participated in rituals associated with the game. This is another area where historians are still piecing together the full picture, trying to understand the diverse roles people played in this ancient tradition. You take one last look around the silent court. The sun is probably beginning to crest the horizon now in your imagination, its first rays starting to illuminate the intricate carvings on the walls that you hadn't noticed in the pre-dawn gloom, images of feathered serpents, jaguar warriors, and scenes from mythology that directly reference the game you've been contemplating. The game was a microcosm of their universe, a stage where the eternal battles of creation were played out by mortals. It was a way to maintain cosmic balance, to appease the gods, to ensure the continuation of life, the fertility of the earth, and the rising of the sun each day. No pressure, right? Just the fate of the cosmos resting on your ability to hip check a 9-pound rubber ball. Most of us feel stressed if we miss a deadline at work. These guys were literally playing to keep the world turning. The sheer endurance of this tradition is staggering. For over 3 millennia, through the rise and fall of great civilizations like the Olmec, the Maya, the Teotihuacanos, and the Aztecs, the ball game remained a vital cultural institution. It adapted, it evolved, but its core essence, a sacred contest of skill and fate, endured. It's a testament to its profound meaning and its deep roots in the Mesoamerican psyche. Even today, variations of the game, known as ulama, are still played in a few communities in Mexico, a living link to this incredible ancient heritage. As you prepare to leave this imagined space, the weight of its history settles upon you. It was a place of spectacle, of athletic brilliance, of deep religious conviction, and sometimes of brutal finality. It was a mirror reflecting the Mesoamerican understanding of life, death, and the cosmos itself. The players were more than athletes. They were intermediaries, actors in a divine play, their efforts resonating far beyond the confines of the stone court. And as you step out, back into the light, you carry with you a sense of awe for this complex and compelling piece of human history, a game that was truly a matter of life, death, and the eternal dance of the universe. You allow the lingering impressions of that generalized ancient court to soften, to become a foundation upon which we can build a more specific, more vivid picture. We've touched upon the vastness of this tradition, its tendrils reaching across millennia and empires. Now let's narrow our gaze, focusing on a civilization that brought the ball game to an artistic and architectural zenith, the classic Maya. Imagine the mists haven't entirely lifted. Instead, they're coalescing, taking you deeper into the Petén rainforest of Guatemala, or perhaps to the limestone plains of the Yucatan Peninsula, somewhere between 250 and 900 AD. This is the era when Mayan civilization flourished, building its iconic stepped pyramids, intricately carved stelae, and of course its magnificent ball courts for playing pits, as they called it. You find yourself approaching a Mayan city. The air is heavy with humidity, alive with the cacophony of the jungle, the screech of howler monkeys, the iridescent flash of a macaw's wing. And then, through a break in the dense foliage, you see it, structures of pale limestone, gleaming in the filtered sunlight, their geometry a stark, beautiful contrast to the organic chaos of the surrounding wilderness. These cities, Tikal, Copan, Palenque, Calakmul, and later the great Chichen Itza, were centers of power, religion, and naturally, spectacular ball games. Let's walk towards the ceremonial heart of this particular Mayan city. The pathways are paved with sakbiab, raised white limestone causeways that connect the key architectural groups. As you get closer, you notice that the ball court here is often centrally located, a testament to its importance in the civic and religious life of the community. It's not tucked away in some recreational annex. It's right there, alongside the pyramids, temples, and palaces. This placement screams significance. It's like putting a football stadium right next to the White House or Westminster Abbey. It says, "This matters. This is part of who we are." The Mayan ball courts, while adhering to the general I shape, often had their own distinct regional styles and features. Some were relatively modest in scale, perhaps serving smaller communities or specific lineage groups. Others were monumental. Consider the Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza in the later post-classic period, but heavily influenced by classic Maya traditions. This is the undisputed giant of Mesoamerican ball courts, a truly awe-inspiring structure. It's so vast, 168 meters long by 70 meters wide, that's about 1.5 American football fields in length, that you could probably host several lesser ball games simultaneously within its confines. The parallel walls are 8 meters, or about 26 feet, high. Standing at one end, the other seems impossibly distant. This mainstream historical fact, the sheer scale of Chichen Itza's court, tells you that by this point, the game had evolved into a massive public spectacle capable of accommodating and impressing huge crowds. One of the most fascinating and almost eerie weird sidebar details about this particular great ball court at Chichen Itza is its acoustics. It's said that if you whisper at one end, your voice can be heard with surprising clarity all the way at the other end, over 500 feet away. Some even say a clap will produce a series of echoes, sounding like the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. Whether this was an intentional design feat by Mayan architects to amplify the sounds of the game and the pronouncements of priests, or simply a happy accident of its massive, smooth-walled construction, is unknown. But imagine the effect: the thwack of the ball, the shouts of the players, the pronouncements of a ruler or priest, all amplified and carried to every spectator, making the experience even more immersive and, frankly, a bit spooky. It's like the universe itself was cupping its ear to listen in. You approach the walls of a typical classic Mayan court. They are often more steeply sloped than in other regions, and sometimes even vertical. And it's here, on these walls, that Mayan artistry truly shines. Many are adorned with intricate, low relief carvings. These aren't just decorative patterns, they are narrative panels, telling stories of mythological beings, legendary players, founding ancestors, and most compellingly, the rituals associated with the game itself. You might see depictions of players in dynamic poses, their bodies contorted as they strike the ball. Their regalia is often incredibly elaborate, towering headdresses plumed with precious feathers, jade pectorals, jaguar pelt skirts, and those essential, often ornately carved yokes and palmas. These weren't just athletes, they were walking works of art, embodiments of power and prestige. You can almost feel the weight of those feathered headdresses, probably not ideal for peripheral vision, but certainly making a statement. Yes, I can hit a 9-pound ball with my hip, and I can do it while balancing a small aviary on my head. Your move. One of the most famous and debated sets of carvings is found at Chichen Itza. Here, a panel vividly depicts a player being decapitated. A stream of blood, stylized as serpents or flowering vines, erupts from his neck, while another player stands holding the severed head. It's undeniably graphic, and it has fueled much of the popular imagination about the deadly nature of the game. But historians still debate whether these intricate carvings represented a literal, common event after every game, or if they are symbolic representations of mythological narratives, perhaps the decapitation of the Maya maize god by underworld deities, or the hero twins' own sacrificial and regenerative journeys. It's possible these scenes were meant to convey the cosmic stakes, the cycle of death and rebirth that the game embodied, rather than a play-by-play of actual post-game activities. Or perhaps it was both, a ritual reenactment that sometimes involved real sacrifice, especially of important captives. The line is, as always with the ball game, wonderfully, frustratingly blurry. Let's imagine a game is about to begin. The pre-game rituals would have been extensive. Players might have undergone periods of fasting and abstinence, purifying themselves for the sacred contest. Priests, adorned in their own elaborate costumes, would burn copal incense, its fragrant smoke wafting through the air, carrying prayers and messages to the gods. There would be music, the rhythmic beat of drums, the haunting call of conch shell trumpets or ceramic flutes, the shaking of rattles, all building an atmosphere of anticipation and spiritual intensity. This wasn't just a pre-game hype video and some national anthems. This was a full-blown religious service leading up to kickoff. A procession of the players enters the court. They move with a practiced solemnity, their expressions grave. These are not just teams. They represent cosmic forces, perhaps the duality of day and night, life and death, or rival lineages within the city. High-ranking nobles and the ruler, the Ahau, would likely be present, perhaps even presiding over the ceremonies from a special viewing platform or temple overlooking the court. Their presence underscored the political importance of the event. A victory could enhance a ruler's prestige. A defeat could signify a weakening of his power or divine favor. You can almost feel the collective gaze of the city upon these players. No pressure, guys, just the entire socio-political and religious order resting on your hip check. Spectators would line the tops of the walls or specially constructed viewing areas. And it wasn't just quiet reverence. There's evidence to suggest that, like sports fans throughout history, the Maya enjoyed a bit of gambling on the outcome of the games. They might bet precious goods, cacao beans, which were used as currency, textiles, jade beads, or even themselves into servitude if the stakes were particularly high. So while the players were contending with cosmic forces and the threat of bodily harm, some dude in the stands was sweating bullets because he'd bet his prize macaw feathers on the home team. It adds a very human layer to the grand spectacle. Now, the game itself. The Mayan version, pits, placed a strong emphasis on those stone hoops, or markers, called tsats. While hitting the ball through the hoop was a game-winning, or at least high-scoring play, it was incredibly difficult. The hoops were often set very high on the vertical or steeply sloped walls, and the opening was only slightly larger than the ball itself. To propel a heavy, solid rubber ball through such a target using only your hip, thigh, or perhaps upper arm required extraordinary skill, power, and let's be honest, a healthy dose of luck. It would have been the ancient equivalent of a full court swish at the buzzer. The crowd would erupt. The successful player would be an instant legend. The movement of the players would be a blur of controlled power. They'd throw their bodies at the hard rubber ball, deflecting it with leather-padded hips and thighs. The thud of the ball against their protective gear, the grunts of exertion, the skid of their feet on the packed earth or plastered surface of the court. These would be the percussive sounds of the contest. Injuries were common. Skeletal remains of individuals believed to be ball players sometimes show evidence of repeated trauma. Broken ribs, damaged hips, even fractured skulls. This was a full-contact sport in every sense of the word. Imagine the medical attention afterwards. Another crushed finger and a mild concussion. Rub some sacred herbs on it. You'll be fine for the next cosmic showdown. Glyphic inscriptions and iconography offer tantalizing clues about the rules and the meaning of the game. Some scenes show players kneeling or lunging in specific postures, suggesting a codified set of movements or stances. The ball could not be touched with the hands or feet in most versions, and letting it fall motionless or die was a fault. The game was likely very fast-paced, demanding incredible reflexes and teamwork. You'd need to anticipate the trajectory of the ball off those unpredictable sloping walls, position yourself perfectly, and then deliver a precise, powerful strike, all while avoiding a collision with an opponent who is equally determined. It makes modern sports look like a gentle stroll in the park. And what of the aftermath, particularly in the Maya context? The association with sacrifice is certainly strong in the art and archaeology. As mentioned, the Chichen Itza panels are quite explicit, but it's important to remember the Mayan worldview. Blood sacrifice, including human sacrifice, was seen as a way to nourish the gods and maintain cosmic order. Blood was a potent life force, and offering it to the deities was a sacred duty, ensuring the continuation of the agricultural cycle, the rains, and the sun's journey. If players were sacrificed, it might have been seen not merely as a punishment for losing, but as a vital contribution to the well-being of the community and the universe. The sacrificed individual, whether a captive warrior or a noble player, might have been transformed into a divine offering, their death ensuring life. It's a difficult concept for us to grasp from our modern perspective, but it was central to their understanding of the world. This is where another scholarly debate arises. Who exactly were these Maya players, especially those depicted in the most elaborate regalia or those involved in sacrificial scenes? Were they always high ranking nobles, proving their valor and fitness to rule? Or were specialized, perhaps lower status, individuals trained specifically for the game, their lives expendable in ritual contexts? Some theories suggest that captive warriors from rival polities were often the ones forced to play in games that would end in their sacrifice, turning the ball court into a stage for political theater and the assertion of dominance. The elaborate costumes seen in some depictions might then be the regalia of the victors, or perhaps ritual attire worn by the sacrificial victims themselves to elevate their status in death. The variety of depictions across different sites and times suggests that there probably wasn't a single, unified answer. It likely depended on the specific city, the specific time, and the specific ritual context of the game. Beyond the grand, state sponsored spectacles, it's also likely that Pits was played in less formal contexts. Smaller courts found in residential areas suggest that it might have been a part of everyday life for many Mayans, a way to build community, settle local disputes, or simply for recreation, perhaps without the high stakes of the major ceremonial games. It's easy to focus on the dramatic, sacrificial aspects, but the game's longevity and ubiquity suggest it also served more mundane, yet equally important, social functions. Maybe there were even ancient Mayan fantasy leagues. My captain, Lord Smoking Jaguar of Tikal, got 3 hip checks and a near hoop shot. I'm totally winning the cacao bean pool this week. One intriguing detail, often found in association with Mayan ball courts or ceremonial complexes nearby, are cached offerings. Archaeologists have discovered dedicatory caches buried beneath the floors of courts or within associated structures. These caches can contain a wealth of precious items, jade beads and plaques, jade being more valuable than gold to the Maya, eccentric flints masterski chipped into elaborate shapes, pottery vessels, obsidian blades, and sometimes, tragically, human remains, perhaps of sacrificed individuals consecrated to the court itself. These offerings provide a tangible link to the rituals and beliefs surrounding the game, silent testimonies to the sacredness of the space and the importance of the activities that took place there. It's like finding a time capsule, each object whispering a secret about the people who placed it there with such care and intention. As you continue to wander this imagined Mayan city, the presence of the ball game is palpable. It's in the art, in the architecture, in the very layout of the ceremonial center. It was a thread woven deeply into the fabric of Mayan society, a complex institution that was simultaneously sport, ritual, political statement, and cosmic drama. The players, whether noble or commoner, captive or free, were key actors in this drama, their bodies the instruments through which these profound narratives were enacted. Think about the sounds again. Not just the amplified whispers at Chichen Itza, but the roar of a crowd packed onto the viewing platforms, the sharp crack of the ball against a stone marker, the ceremonial chants of priests, the deep throb of drums setting a rhythm for the game and for the hearts of those watching. It would have been an overwhelming sensory experience, a potent cocktail of athletic prowess, religious fervor, and communal identity. And through it all, the silent, ever present gaze of the gods, for whom this grand, dangerous, and beautiful game was ultimately played. The sun beats down on the limestone, the humidity hangs heavy, and the echoes of pits linger in the air, a timeless reminder of a world where sport was sacred, and life and death danced on the edge of a blade or the bounce of a rubber ball. The humid air of the Mayan jungle begins to thin, the dense canopy giving way to a different landscape, a different era. We've walked through the grandeur of classic Maya pits, felt the weight of its cosmic significance and the echoes in its silent courts. But the story of the Mesoamerican ball game doesn't end there. Like a river, it flowed onwards, carving new paths through new civilizations, each adding its own currents and eddies to the ancient tradition. Now let your mind drift northwards, towards the central highlands of Mexico, to the magnificent, bustling capital of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan. We're moving forward in time to the 14th to 16th centuries, a period when the Aztecs, or the Mexica as they called themselves, reigned supreme. Imagine yourself arriving at Tenochtitlan, a city built astonishingly on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, a Venice of the New World, with its intricate network of canals, floating gardens, and towering pyramids. Within the vast sacred precinct, the beating heart of this powerful empire, stood the Teotlachco, the sacred ball court. Here the game was known as Olamalisli, from the word oli, rubber, and the verb tlama, to hunt or pursue game. The Aztecs, inheritors of many Mesoamerican traditions, embraced the ball game with their characteristic fervor, integrating it deeply into their complex social, political, and religious systems. The Aztec ball courts were, like their predecessors, generally eye-shaped, though perhaps with variations in angle and court markers. The game was still played with a solid rubber ball, and the primary method of striking it remained the hips, thighs, and sometimes the upper arms. The Spanish conquistadors, who arrived in the early 16th century, were among the first Europeans to witness Olamalisli, and their chronicles provide us with some of our most detailed, if often biased, accounts. This is a mainstream historical fact. These Spanish observers, like Hernan Cortés himself, were both amazed and appalled by what they saw. They marveled at the skill of the players and the incredible bounce of the rubber ball, something entirely new to them, but they condemned the game's association with gambling, idolatry, and, of course, human sacrifice. Their accounts paint a picture of a vibrant, high-stakes spectacle. The Aztec players were often nobles or warriors, highly trained and respected for their abilities. The game was a display of prowess, a way to gain prestige and honor. Codices, the painted books of the Aztecs, depict players in their characteristic loincloths and protective gear, sometimes with specific glyphs indicating their names or affiliations. They played with an intensity that captivated onlookers. One can imagine the Teotlachco in Tenochtitlan, surrounded by the towering pyramids dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. The game played out in this sacred space would have been charged with immense religious meaning, a reflection of the cosmic battles central to Aztec belief. The ball, as in other cultures, could represent the sun, the moon, or even the severed head of a vanquished deity, its movement across the court mirroring celestial journeys. Gambling on the outcome of Olamalisli matches reached epic proportions among the Aztecs. Spectators, from commoners to the highest nobility, would wager vast fortunes: cacao beans, precious textiles, jade, gold, land, and sometimes, in a display of truly questionable financial planning, even themselves or their family members into slavery. The Spanish chroniclers noted this with a mixture of fascination and disapproval, describing how some nobles would lose everything they owned on the outcome of a single game. It's like the Super Bowl, the World Cup, and a high-stakes poker game all rolled into one, but with the added possibility of becoming someone's indentured servant if your team fumbled. There's a particularly intriguing, weird sidebar detail recounted in some histories about the Aztec emperor Axayacatl. The story goes that he engaged in a legendary ball game against the ruler of Xochimilco, a neighboring city-state. The stakes were astronomical. Axayacatl bet his entire year's worth of tribute from his subjects against the main marketplace of Xochimilco. Apparently, the emperor was quite the player, because he won, effectively annexing a significant economic asset through a sporting event. Imagine modern leaders settling trade disputes with a quick game of one-on-one basketball. Best 2 out of 3 for those favorable tariffs. It certainly would make international summits more entertaining. The Aztec worldview was one of cosmic struggle, where the gods needed constant nourishment, often in the form of human blood, to maintain the order of the universe and ensure the sun would rise each day. Human sacrifice was a central tenet of their religion, and the ball game was one of the many contexts in which it occurred. Captive warriors, often taken in the ritualized battles known as Xochiaoyotl, or Flower Wars, might be forced to play in the Teotlacco before their inevitable sacrifice. These Flower Wars were pre-arranged conflicts between Aztec city-states and their rivals, with the primary objective being the capture of warriors for ritual offerings rather than territorial conquest. And this brings us to another fascinating scholarly debate. Historians still debate the extent to which the game directly fueled warfare, such as these Aztec Flower Wars. Were these wars primarily orchestrated to obtain captives specifically for sacrificial ball games and temple rituals, making the game a direct driver of military conflict? Or did the game merely incorporate victims from existing political and military struggles, serving as a ritualized display of power and a means of disposing of enemies? It's likely a complex interplay. The need for sacrificial victims was undeniably a part of Aztec statecraft, and the ball court was one of the potent stages upon which this ideology was performed. Regardless of the precise mechanics, the connection between Olamalisli, warfare, and sacrifice was an undeniable and chilling aspect of Aztec life. The loser, or the designated captive, facing their end would have been a stark reminder of the empire's power and the gods' insatiable demands. Definitely puts a bit of a damper on the post-game celebrations if you're on the wrong team. Then came the Spanish conquest in 1521. This event marked a cataclysmic shift for the indigenous cultures of Mesoamerica, and the ball game was not immune. The conquistadors, driven by a desire for gold and a fervent mission to convert the native populations to Christianity, viewed many indigenous practices, including Olamalisli, as idolatrous and barbaric. The game's association with human sacrifice and what they perceived as pagan deities made it a prime target for suppression. Temples were destroyed, religious ceremonies were banned, and ball courts were often dismantled or repurposed. Codices containing invaluable knowledge about the game, its rules, and its rituals were systematically burned by zealous friars, an incalculable loss of cultural heritage. It's a tragic irony that the same chroniclers who gave us some insight into the game were also part of the system that actively sought to eradicate it. The prohibition wasn't entirely successful, of course. A tradition so deeply ingrained for over 3,000 years doesn't simply vanish overnight. In many areas, the game likely went underground, played in secret, perhaps stripped of its more overt religious trappings to avoid the wrath of the colonial authorities. It transformed, adapted, and in some isolated regions, managed to survive in modified forms. But the grand, state-sponsored spectacles, the towering ball courts in the hearts of ceremonial centers, the elaborate rituals, these largely faded into history, buried under the foundations of colonial cities and churches. You can imagine the last few generations of players trying to keep the tradition alive, whispering the rules to their children, playing with makeshift balls in hidden clearings, the echoes of the thundering crowds replaced by the silence of fear and the rustle of an encroaching new world. It's a poignant image of cultural resilience in the face of overwhelming force. Yet the Mesoamerican ballgame, even in its diminished state, refused to die completely. Today, a direct descendant of this ancient sport, known as ulama, is still played in a few communities in the Mexican state of Sinaloa. There are different versions of ulama, one played with the hip, much like its ancient predecessor, another with the forearm, and a third with a wooden stick. The players, often from families that have maintained this tradition for generations, compete with incredible skill and dedication, using a heavy rubber ball on long earthen courts. While the overt sacrificial elements are long gone, thankfully for the players' life expectancies, ulama retains a sense of historical continuity, a living thread connecting the present day back to the distant past of the Olmec, Maya, and Aztec. Watching a game of ulama is like witnessing a ghost, a vibrant echo of a world that has otherwise vanished. It's a powerful reminder that cultures can endure in unexpected ways. Probably less gambling on your entire livelihood now, which is a positive development for household finances. The rediscovery and understanding of the ancient Mesoamerican ballgame in its fuller context has been a slow, painstaking process for archaeologists, anthropologists, and historians. It involves meticulously excavating ancient ball courts, analyzing the iconography on stone carvings and pottery, deciphering the few surviving codices, and carefully interpreting the often biased accounts of Spanish chroniclers. Each new discovery, each reinterpretation of existing evidence adds another piece to the vast, complex puzzle. We may never know all the rules, all the regional variations, or the full depth of its meaning to every individual who played or watched it. But what we do know paints a picture of a tradition that was far more than just a sport. It was a sophisticated social mechanism, a form of political theater, a profound religious ritual, and a thrilling athletic contest, all rolled into one. It reflected the Mesoamerican understanding of the cosmos, the eternal struggle between light and darkness, life and death, order and chaos. The ball court was a stage where these cosmic dramas were enacted, and the players were the mortal conduits for these powerful forces. It was a way of making sense of the world, of participating in its maintenance, and of connecting with the divine. As you let the story of the Mesoamerican ballgame settle in your mind, from its shadowy Olmec origins to the grandeur of Mayan pits and the fierce intensity of Aztec Olamalistli, and finally to its resilient echoes in modern Ulama, what emerges is a profound sense of human ingenuity, devotion, and an enduring need for both spectacle and meaning. These ancient peoples poured so much of their artistry, their engineering skill, their physical prowess, and their spiritual belief into this game. It was a central pillar of their world for millennia. And even though the great stone courts are now silent, visited mostly by tourists and the occasional archaeologist, the spirit of that ancient game, the thud of that rubber ball, the roar of that long-vanished crowd, still whispers to us across the centuries, a testament to a truly remarkable chapter in human history. It's a good reminder that what seems like just a game can often hold the deepest keys to understanding a culture. Now, as our journey through the Mesoamerican ball courts comes to a close, allow the images to soften, the sounds to fade. The intense focus of the players, the weight of the rubber ball, the roar of the ancient crowds all begin to recede, like figures walking away into a gentle mist. The sharp edges of the stone courts blur, the vibrant colors of the players' attire become muted, pastel shades. The humid air of the jungle or the crisp air of the highlands grows still and quiet around you. There are no more stakes to consider, no more cosmic battles to be waged on the playing field of your mind. The players have laid down their heavy yokes. The spectators have drifted home under a canopy of stars that once guided their understanding of the universe. The great cycle of the game, with its efforts and its outcomes, has found its rest for the night. All that remains is the peace of a story told, a journey completed. Let the gentle rhythm of your own breath be the only movement now. Feel the support beneath you, holding you, allowing every muscle to release, to soften, to grow heavy with comfort. Any lingering thoughts about ancient rituals or hard-fought contests can simply drift by, like clouds across a serene night sky. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing left to figure out, only the quiet invitation to rest, to let go, to sink deeper into tranquility. The echoes of the past are now just gentle murmurs, lulling you further into a state of profound calm. The ancient world sleeps, and so can you. Hey everyone, tonight we are drifting back, way back, through the mists of time, to a city that shimmered like a jewel on the Mediterranean coast, a beacon of learning and a testament to an almost breathtaking ambition. We're journeying to ancient Alexandria, to the hallowed halls of its legendary Great Library, a place that sought to contain nothing less than all the knowledge in the world. Imagine the scent of old papyrus, the faint whisper of scholars debating in hushed Greek, the immense, quiet weight of countless scrolls promising secrets of the universe. This wasn't just a library. It was a dream made tangible, a dream of understanding everything. And let's be real, faced with cataloging hundreds of thousands of scrolls without a Dewey Decimal System or even a decent search engine, you probably wouldn't have survived the sheer organizational challenge, let alone the political intrigue that eventually engulfed it. So before you get cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support is like finding a perfectly preserved scroll, a true treasure. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always a quiet thrill to think of us all connecting across time zones, sharing these stories. Now switch off your lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the shores of the Mediterranean, the warm Egyptian sun on your face, the salty air alive with the sounds of a bustling, cosmopolitan city. This is Alexandria, founded around 331 BCE by Alexander the Great himself. While Alexander didn't live to see his vision fully realized, his ambition was clear: to create a magnificent metropolis, a crossroads of cultures and commerce, a new center for the Hellenistic world. And in this, he, or rather his successors, succeeded spectacularly. After Alexander's early death, his vast empire was divided among his generals, and Egypt fell to Ptolemy the First Soter. It was under the Ptolemaic dynasty that Alexandria truly blossomed into the intellectual powerhouse we remember. The Ptolemies, particularly Ptolemy I and his son Ptolemy II Philadelphus, were not just rulers, they were keen patrons of learning, arts, and sciences. They understood that knowledge was power, that attracting the brightest minds to their capital would enhance its prestige and influence. They envisioned Alexandria not just as a hub of trade, with its magnificent double harbor and the towering Pharos lighthouse, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, guiding ships in, but as a beacon of human intellect. Imagine the city itself: wide avenues laid out on a grid system, opulent royal palaces gleaming in the Brucheian quarter, bustling marketplaces filled with goods from across the known world, Greek wine, African ivory, Arabian incense, Indian spices. It was a melting pot, a vibrant tapestry woven from Greek, Egyptian, and Jewish cultures, among others. Scholars, poets, merchants, and travelers from all corners of the Mediterranean and beyond flocked here. And at the very heart of this intellectual ferment was an institution known as the Mausion, or the Shrine of the Muses. This mainstream historical fact, it is key. The Great Library of Alexandria was not a standalone entity, but rather an integral part of this larger research institution, the Mausion. Dedicated to the nine muses, the Greek goddesses of the arts and sciences, the Mausion was something akin to a modern university, combined with a think tank and a research institute. It had lecture halls, laboratories, observatories, botanical gardens, a zoo, and communal dining areas. Scholars who were invited to become members received generous stipends from the Ptolemaic rulers, living accommodations, and crucially, freedom from most teaching duties. Their primary task was research, scholarship, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. It sounds like an academic paradise, doesn't it? Free room and board, a salary, and all you have to do is think big thoughts and occasionally publish a groundbreaking treatise. Sign me up for that ancient fellowship. Within this vibrant intellectual ecosystem, the Great Library was born. The ambition behind it was audacious, almost dizzyingly so, to collect copies of all known books from every culture and in every language. Ptolemy I, likely advised by the exiled Athenian statesman Demetrius of Phalerum, initiated this grand project. Demetrius, a student of Aristotle's school, understood the value of a comprehensive collection of texts. The goal was not just to amass scrolls, but to create a universal repository of human knowledge, a place where the wisdom of the ages could be studied, compared, and expanded upon. How did they go about acquiring such a vast collection? The Ptolemies employed several rather effective, if sometimes ethically questionable, methods. Firstly, there was the famous, or perhaps infamous, ship shakedown policy. This is a wonderfully weird sidebar detail. Any ship docking in Alexandria's harbor was searched for books. If scrolls were found, they were taken to the library. Here, scribes would meticulously copy the texts. The newly made copies were then given back to the original owners, while the library kept the originals. Imagine being a merchant captain, proud of your small collection of Homer, only to have it requisitioned by Alexandrian customs, copied, and your slightly less prestigious copy handed back. Thanks for your contribution to universal knowledge, Captain. Don't let the library door hit you on the way out. Talk about an aggressive acquisition strategy. It certainly ensured a steady stream of new material. Beyond this compulsory acquisition, the Ptolemies also allocated enormous sums of money for purchasing scrolls from book markets across Greece, the Near East, and beyond. Royal agents, essentially ancient book hunters, were dispatched with fat purses and instructions to procure texts on every conceivable subject. They would also commission new works from contemporary authors and sponsor massive translation projects. Perhaps the most famous of these was the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, undertaken in Alexandria, legend says, by 72 scholars. The sheer number of scrolls accumulated is staggering, though ancient estimates vary wildly, and it's something historians still debate. Some sources claim tens of thousands, others speak of 400,000, and some even go as high as 700,000 scrolls. It's hard to be certain. What constituted a scroll? Sometimes a single book of a larger work, like one book of the Iliad, would be on one scroll. So a complete multi-volume work could consist of many scrolls. Regardless of the exact figure, it was undoubtedly the largest and most significant collection of written knowledge in the ancient world. Historians still debate whether the daughter library, established later at the Temple of Serapis, the Serapeum, eventually surpassed the main library in importance or size, particularly after the main library suffered its first misfortunes. Imagine these scrolls. They weren't the bound books or codices that became common later. These were predominantly rolls of papyrus, a thick paper-like material made from the reeds of the Nile Delta. Scribes would write in columns using reed pens and ink made from soot, gum, and water. A long work might require multiple scrolls, stored in pigeonholes or on shelves, often with a small identifying tag, a syllabus hanging from the end. Just the physical labor of creating, handling, and preserving hundreds of thousands of these relatively fragile papyrus rolls in the warm, sometimes humid Mediterranean climate would have been a monumental undertaking. They probably had a whole department dedicated to just trying to stop things from crumbling into dust or being eaten by bookworms, the literal kind. The early stewardship of this burgeoning collection fell to a series of brilliant librarians and scholars. Demetrius of Phalerum, as mentioned, likely played a key role in its initial organization. The first formally appointed librarian was Zenodotus of Ephesus, a Homeric scholar who dedicated himself to producing standardized, critical editions of the great epic poems, comparing different versions to weed out errors and establish a more authentic text. This was groundbreaking work in textual criticism. Following Zenodotus was the poet and scholar Callimachus of Cyrene. While he may not have held the official title of chief librarian, his contribution was immense. Callimachus undertook the monumental task of creating the Pinaques, or tables, a comprehensive catalog of the library's holdings. This wasn't just a list of titles, it was a critical bibliography, organizing works by genre and author, providing biographical information about the authors and summaries of the texts. The Pinax itself reportedly filled 120 scrolls and was an indispensable tool for navigating the vast collection. It was essentially the ancient world's first and greatest library catalog, the blueprint for how we organize knowledge even today. Imagine trying to find anything in 400,000 scrolls without a good catalog. Excuse me, do you have Sophocles' lost play, The Onion Choppers? I think it's an isle, papyrus? Later, the polymath Eratosthenes of Cyrene served as chief librarian. He was a geographer, mathematician, astronomer, historian, and poet. It was Eratosthenes who, while working in Alexandria, famously calculated the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy using simple geometry and observations of the sun's angle at different locations. Just another day at the office for an Alexandrian librarian. Discover a few lost plays, edit some poetry, calculate the size of the planet. No big deal. Then there was Aristophanes of Byzantium, another head librarian who made significant contributions to scholarship by inventing a system of Greek accent marks to aid in the correct pronunciation and understanding of classical texts, which was particularly important as Greek became a lingua franca, spoken by many non-native speakers. These little dots and dashes, which we might take for granted, were a major innovation for textual clarity. Life within the halls of the Mesoamerican and the library must have been intellectually intoxicating. Imagine walking through colonnaded courtyards, past lecture halls echoing with debates on philosophy, mathematics, or medicine. Scholars from different backgrounds and disciplines would have mingled, sharing ideas, challenging assumptions. You might see Euclid, whose Elements of Geometry, largely compiled and organized in Alexandria, would become the standard textbook for over 2 millennia, or Herophilus of Chalcedon, the father of anatomy, who controversially performed human dissections, vastly expanding medical knowledge. The air itself would have hummed with the thrill of discovery, the pursuit of understanding. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Papyrus is fragile. It decays in humidity, becomes brittle in dryness, and is susceptible to insects. The preservation of such a vast collection would have required a constant effort of recopying aging scrolls, repairing damaged ones, and battling the elements. And then there was the challenge of translation. The ambition to collect knowledge from all cultures meant acquiring texts in Egyptian, Hebrew, Babylonian, and other languages, which then needed to be translated into Greek, the working language of the Mesoamerican. This required skilled linguists and a deep understanding of different cultures. The library wasn't just a passive repository. It was an active center of textual production and transformation. As you wander these imagined halls, lined with countless shelves reaching towards high ceilings, the scent of papyrus and old ink filling your senses, you feel the immense weight and wonder of this enterprise. It was a bold declaration of faith in the power of human reason in the value of accumulated wisdom. The Ptolemies weren't just building a library, they were trying to build a collective human brain, a place where all thoughts, all stories, all discoveries could converge and spark new insights. It was an age of intellectual giants, walking among shelves laden with the thoughts of generations past, all under the warm Egyptian sun by the shores of the wine-dark sea. The very idea of it is enough to make you want to pick up a dusty scroll and start reading, even if it's just the ancient equivalent of a self-help book titled Chariot Maintenance for Dummies. You drift deeper into the golden afternoon of Alexandria's intellectual zenith. The initial flurry of acquisition and organization we witnessed in the library's early days has borne incredible fruit. This isn't just a vast storehouse of ancient texts, it's a humming engine of discovery, a place where the accumulated wisdom of the past is actively interrogated, refined, and used as a springboard for new, breathtaking insights. The air in the Mausion complex feels charged with a unique kind of energy, the quiet crackle of minds at work. Imagine walking through sun-dappled colonnades, the sound of fountains providing a gentle counterpoint to the distant murmur of debate. You might pass a lecture hall where a scholar is expounding on the newly translated philosophies of the East, or a quiet alcove where a mathematician is scratching complex diagrams onto a wax tablet, lost in a world of pure form. This is the era where the library's resources fueled a remarkable flourishing of human understanding. One of the towering figures whose work echoed from these halls was Euclid. While his personal life remains shrouded in mystery, his masterwork, The Elements, compiled and systematized in Alexandria, became the foundational text for geometry for over 2,000 years. This is a mainstream historical fact that underscores the library's profound impact. Euclid, drawing upon the rich collection of mathematical scrolls and the intellectual ferment of the Mausion, didn't just invent geometry, but he organized existing knowledge into a rigorous, logical system of axioms, definitions, and proofs that became the gold standard for mathematical reasoning. Generations of students, right up to the modern era, have learned geometry from principles laid down in his Elements. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of unfurling a papyrus scroll containing Euclid's elegant proofs, the world of shapes and numbers resolving into perfect order. It's like the ultimate mental decluttering. Then there were the medical pioneers, Herophilus of Chalcedon and his contemporary Erasistratus of Ceos. This is where things take a turn into a truly weird sidebar detail, one that highlights both the groundbreaking nature of Alexandrian science and the very different ethical landscape of the ancient world. Under the patronage of the early Ptolemies, Herophilus and Erasistratus were permitted to perform human dissections to study anatomy and physiology. This was almost unheard of in the Greek world, where the sanctity of the human body usually forbade such practices. Some ancient sources, though controversially, even suggest they may have performed vivisections on condemned criminals supplied by the state. It's a chilling thought, and we must approach it with caution, but the knowledge gained was revolutionary. Herophilus, for instance, distinguished between sensory and motor nerves, recognized the brain as the seat of intelligence, not the heart, as Aristotle had believed, and accurately described the optic nerve and retina. Erasistratus studied the functions of the heart and circulatory system. Their work laid much of the groundwork for scientific medicine. While the methods are deeply unsettling to our modern sensibilities, and rightly so, it's undeniable that their direct anatomical observations, made possible by the unique environment of Ptolemaic Alexandria, represented a monumental leap forward in understanding the human body. You can imagine the hushed, intense atmosphere in their research spaces, the smell of preserving herbs, the focused determination to unlock the body's secrets, all while probably trying not to think too hard about where their research material came from. It's a stark reminder that the pursuit of knowledge has sometimes walked a very fine line. While the great inventor Archimedes of Syracuse was not a permanent resident, he is known to have studied in Alexandria, or at least corresponded extensively with the scholars there, like Eratosthenes. His groundbreaking work in mathematics, physics, and engineering, his famous Eureka moment connected to hydrostatics, all benefited from the intellectual currents flowing through Alexandria. The library and Mosion created a network of minds, a shared wellspring of ideas that stimulated innovation across the Hellenistic world. It was the ancient equivalent of a global research network, except instead of email, you had to wait for a ship to carry your latest theorem. Dear Eratosthenes, regarding that sphere problem, P.S. The figs you sent were excellent. And then there was Claudius Ptolemaeus, known to us simply as Ptolemy, who worked in Alexandria during the 2nd century CE, long after the initial Ptolemaic dynasty, but still within the library's sphere of influence. His works, particularly the Almagest on astronomy and the geography, became canonical texts for well over a millennium. The Almagest presented a comprehensive mathematical model of the cosmos, with the Earth at the center, that despite its inaccuracies, was the standard astronomical reference in Europe and the Islamic world until Copernicus. His geography systematized geographical knowledge, established methods for map-making using latitude and longitude, and listed coordinates for thousands of locations. For centuries, if you wanted to understand the heavens or the earth, you consulted Ptolemy, whose work was built upon the foundations laid by earlier Alexandrian scholars and the vast repository of data in the library. The creation of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, continued to be a monumental achievement. Imagine the teams of scholars, Jewish and perhaps Greek, poring over ancient Hebrew scrolls, carefully weighing the meaning of each word, striving to render it accurately into Koine Greek, the common language of the Eastern Mediterranean. This translation not only made these sacred texts accessible to a wider Hellenistic audience, including the large Jewish diaspora in Alexandria, but it also became a foundational text for early Christianity. The library wasn't just a passive collector, it was an active site of cultural and religious translation and transmission. Let's try to picture the physical space where all this intellectual ferment occurred. The great library itself, likely located within the Bruchaion, the royal palace quarter, wasn't just one monolithic building. It probably consisted of a series of interconnected halls, colonnaded walkways, and smaller rooms. Imagine long corridors lined with innumerable wooden or stone pigeonholes, each filled with papyrus scrolls. Perhaps there were grand reading rooms, filled with natural light from high windows, where scholars could sit at tables, carefully unrolling precious texts. There would be scriptoria, dedicated spaces where scribes, often highly educated slaves or paid professionals, meticulously copied worn out scrolls or produced new editions. The gentle scratching of reed pens on papyrus would have been a constant background hum. And how did anyone find anything in this ocean of papyrus? This is where Callimachus's Pinnaces comes into its own. This wasn't just a simple list, it was a subject catalog divided into broad categories like epic poets, tragic poets, comic poets, historians, orators, philosophers, medical writers, and so on. Within each category, authors were listed alphabetically, often with a short biography, a list of their known works, and even the first line of each work to help distinguish different versions or identify fragments. It was an astonishing feat of organization, a pioneering effort in information retrieval. You couldn't just type a keyword into a search bar, so having a well-structured catalog, even if it filled 120 scrolls itself, was absolutely crucial. It was the intellectual roadmap to this universe of knowledge. One can only imagine the frantic search for a misplaced scroll. Has anyone seen Book 3 of Berossus's Babyloniaca? It's not under B, it's not under history, and I'm starting to think someone's using it as a very learned coaster. The workforce maintaining this institution was considerable. Beyond the famous head librarians and star scholars, there were armies of scribes, copyists, textual critics who compared different versions of texts, restorers who painstakingly repaired damaged papyri, and specialized librarians who might have focused on particular subject areas. These were the unsung heroes of the library, the people whose daily labor kept the whole enterprise running, ensuring that knowledge was not only collected, but also preserved and made accessible. But even in this golden age, shadows were beginning to lengthen. The stability of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had been so crucial for the library's founding and flourishing, started to fray. Internal power struggles, sibling rivalries often escalating into civil war, and a general decline in competent rulership began to plague the later Ptolemies. This political instability inevitably impacted the Museion and its library. Patronage might waver, stipends might be cut, and the intellectual climate could become precarious if scholars were perceived as taking sides in political disputes. A particularly notorious example is Ptolemy VIII Euergetes II, often mockingly called Physcon or Potbelly. During his tumultuous reign in the 2nd century BCE, he engaged in brutal purges of intellectuals in Alexandria, whom he suspected of opposing him. Many prominent scholars associated with the Mesoamerican were either executed or forced into exile. This scattering of Alexandrian scholarship, while a blow to the institution itself, ironically had the unintended consequence of spreading Alexandrian learning to other parts of the Hellenistic world, as exiled scholars set up schools and continued their work elsewhere. It's a grim sort of intellectual diaspora. Flee the tyrant, start a new philosophy department. And then came the event that has echoed through history as a symbol of catastrophic loss: the fire during Julius Caesar's Alexandrian War in 48 BCE. Caesar found himself embroiled in a Ptolemaic dynastic struggle between Cleopatra VII and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. Besieged in the palace quarter of Alexandria, Caesar ordered enemy ships in the harbor to be set on fire to prevent them from being used against him. According to several ancient writers, including Plutarch, Seneca, and Cassius Dio, This fire spread from the docks and consumed a vast number of books. Plutarch mentions that great numbers of books stored in warehouses near the harbor were destroyed. This is where a major scholarly debate ignites, one that continues to this day. Historians still debate the actual extent of the damage caused by Caesar's fire in 48 BCE. Was it a catastrophic loss for the main Great Library itself, located within the palace complex? Or did the fire primarily affect scrolls stored in warehouses near the docks, perhaps awaiting export, or newly arrived collections yet to be processed and incorporated into the library proper? Some scholars argue that the figure of 40,000 or even 400,000 scrolls destroyed, mentioned by some sources, refers to these warehoused books, and that the main library, while perhaps suffering some damage, largely survived. Others believe this fire marked the beginning of the end for the Great Library as the unparalleled institution it once was. The ancient accounts are somewhat ambiguous, leaving room for various interpretations. It's like an ancient cold case. The evidence is old, the witnesses long dead, and everyone has a different theory about what really went up in smoke. Despite this potential disaster, there is compelling evidence that Alexandria and its library or libraries continued to function as a major intellectual center for centuries. Scholars were still working, texts were still being produced, and students still flocked to the city to learn. There are even accounts, though also debated, of Mark Antony later gifting Cleopatra a vast collection of 200,000 scrolls from the Library of Pergamum in Asia Minor, supposedly to help replenish Alexandria's collection. If true, it suggests both a significant earlier loss and a continued commitment to the library's grandeur. Though knowing Antony and Cleopatra, it might have just been a very extravagant, "sorry I burned your books" present. It's also crucial to remember the daughter library located at the Serapeum, a magnificent temple dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, situated in a different part of the city. This collection, possibly established as an overflow or a more publicly accessible branch of the Great Library, seems to have grown in importance over time, especially if the main library in the Brucheion faced setbacks. The Serapeum itself was an impressive complex, built on a hill with colonnades, shrines, and its own lecture halls. It likely housed tens of thousands of scrolls and became a significant center of learning in its own right. So while the fire of 48 BCE was undoubtedly of a blow and a worrying portent of the fragility of this accumulated knowledge, it was likely not the final death knell that some popular accounts suggest. The library, or at least the intellectual life it represented in Alexandria, was resilient. It had weathered political storms and would continue to do so for a time. The pursuit of knowledge, once kindled so brightly, is not so easily extinguished. It flickers, it may dim, but the human desire to understand, to explore the universe of thought contained within those precious scrolls, endured. The whispers of forgotten wisdom were still being heard, studied, and debated in the halls and courtyards of Alexandria, even as new storm clouds gathered on the horizon. You feel the intellectual vibrancy of Alexandria, that golden hum of discovery we basked in, begin to falter, to face new and increasingly formidable challenges. The centuries roll on, and the Mediterranean world is changing. The library, or what remains of its grand collections, and the traditions it fostered, finds itself caught in the turbulent currents of imperial politics and profound religious transformation. The whispers of forgotten wisdom are now vying with the rising winds of conflict and new orthodoxies. The Roman Empire, which had long since absorbed Egypt, began to experience its own internal stresses. The crisis of the 3rd century CE saw a period of intense political instability, civil wars, and economic hardship across the empire. Alexandria, a vital port and a potential seat of rebellion, was not spared. Around 272 CE, during the Emperor Aurelian's campaign to reconquer breakaway parts of the empire, the city suffered significant damage. The Brucheion quarter, the old royal district that had housed the main Mausion and the original Great Library, was reportedly devastated in the fighting. If substantial parts of the library's collection were still there, this would have been another grievous blow. Imagine Roman legions clashing amidst the very colonnades where scholars once debated Aristotle, ancient scrolls perhaps becoming kindling for wartime fires. It's a historian's nightmare. Hold your fire, lads. That might be a first edition Herodotus, but perhaps more transformative than military conflict was the profound religious shift occurring throughout the Roman world, the rise of Christianity. As Christianity grew from a persecuted sect to a dominant, and eventually the state-endorsed, religion, attitudes towards classical or pagan, learning became more complex and often contentious. While some Christian scholars sought to integrate classical philosophy with Christian theology, figures like Clement of Alexandria and Origen had already done so within Alexandria itself. Others viewed pagan literature and science with suspicion as relics of a superseded, idolatrous past. This brings us to a pivotal and well-documented event, a mainstream historical fact in the library's long decline: the destruction of the Serapeum in 1847, 391 CE. The Serapeum, you'll recall, was that magnificent temple to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, which also housed the significant daughter library. By the late 4th century, Emperor Theodosius I had issued a series of decrees effectively outlawing pagan worship throughout the empire. Theophilus, the ambitious and uncompromising patriarch of Alexandria, seized upon these decrees as an opportunity to assert Christian dominance in the city. He incited a mob to attack and demolish the Serapeum. Ancient accounts describe the temple being torn down, its pagan idols smashed, and its sacred precincts ransacked. And with it, the library it housed, containing tens of thousands of scrolls, faced destruction or dispersal. Imagine the scene: the crashing of statues, the shouts of the zealous crowd, the frantic, perhaps futile attempts by any remaining priests or scholars of the old ways to save some of the precious texts. It's a heartbreaking image of cultural iconoclasm. What happened to the scrolls? Some may have been deliberately burned, others looted, some perhaps rescued and hidden away by individuals. But the institution, the organized collection within the Serapeum, was effectively obliterated. It's like watching a city's main public library get torn down by a mob. Not exactly a good day for literacy or cultural heritage. The intellectual climate in Alexandria grew increasingly polarized. Less than a quarter century later, in 415 CE, the brilliant female philosopher and mathematician Hypatia, a respected Neoplatonist scholar who taught and lectured in Alexandria, was brutally murdered by a Christian mob. While the exact political and religious motivations behind her killing are complex, her death is often seen as a symbolic watershed, marking a tragic end to Alexandria's long tradition of pagan intellectual freedom and open inquiry. The space for non Christian thought was rapidly shrinking. And so, we arrive at the final, and perhaps most famous, though also most contested chapter in the library's demise, the Arab conquest of Egypt in 642 CE. For centuries, a story has circulated, first appearing in accounts written much later, that the conquering Arab general Amr ibn al-As consulted Caliph Omar about what to do with the books in the library. The Caliph supposedly replied that if the books agreed with the Quran, they were redundant, and if they disagreed, they were heretical, and in either case, they should be destroyed. The story concludes that the vast number of remaining scrolls were then distributed among Alexandria's public bathhouses to be used as fuel, supposedly lasting 6 months. This vivid tale of wisdom feeding the flames of bathhouses is certainly dramatic, but historians still debate its veracity. Many scholars now view this account as a fabrication or a piece of later propaganda emerging centuries after the conquest. They argue that by 642 CE, after centuries of fires, political purges, religious conflict, neglect, and the general decline of the papyrus trade, the great collections of the library, both the main one and the Serapeum, were likely long gone, dispersed, or significantly diminished. It's possible that some smaller collections or remnants existed, but the idea of a still massive library being systematically burned to heat baths is considered by many to be highly improbable. It's more likely a cautionary tale about the perceived clash of civilizations, or a way to attribute the library's loss to a single, dramatic event, rather than a slow, complex decay. So did the scrolls really provide 6 months of well-heated ancient spa days? Probably not, but it makes for a heck of a story. So what was truly lost in this centuries-long unraveling? The scale of the tragedy is almost impossible to fully comprehend. We're talking about countless unique works of ancient literature, history, science, and philosophy that have vanished from the world forever. Think of the lost plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. We have a fraction of their output, but we know from ancient catalogs and references that they wrote hundreds more. Imagine having access to all those other dramas, new insights into Greek tragedy and myth. Consider the poems of Sappho, most of which survive only in tantalizing fragments. What would her complete works tell us about ancient love, life, and art? Historians like Berossus of Babylonia and Manetho of Egypt wrote comprehensive histories of their civilizations, drawing on temple records and ancient traditions. These works, which were housed in Alexandria, are now known mostly through summaries or quotes by later authors. Imagine having their complete, original accounts. What deeper understanding of Mesopotamian or Egyptian history would we possess? Vast portions of Livy's monumental history of Rome are missing. Many philosophical treatises by early Greek thinkers, alternative scientific theories, detailed astronomical observations, advanced mathematical texts, all potentially lost in the decline of Alexandria. It's like having most of the internet deleted, not just your browser history, but huge swathes of the foundational knowledge of a civilization. Does this mean the loss of the library plunged the world into a dark age, and set back human progress by centuries? That's a more nuanced question. While the concentration of knowledge in Alexandria was unparalleled, and its loss was undoubtedly a profound blow, knowledge wasn't solely confined there. Other centers of learning existed, particularly in the Byzantine Empire and later in the burgeoning Islamic world. Many texts that were once in Alexandria survived because copies had been made and carried elsewhere, or because scholars who studied there transmitted that knowledge. The Arab scholars, for instance, played a crucial role in preserving and building upon Greek science and philosophy during Europe's early Middle Ages. So it wasn't a simple case of Alexandria falling and the lights going out everywhere, but the potential that was lost, the unique confluence of texts and minds, is truly incalculable. And yet, the legacy of the Library of Alexandria is not just one of loss, it's also one of enduring inspiration. The very idea of a universal library, a place dedicated to collecting and preserving all human knowledge, has resonated through the ages, inspiring the creation of great libraries and universities across the globe, right up to our modern national libraries and ambitious digital archiving projects. Furthermore, many of the classical texts we do possess today owe their survival, at least in part, to the scholarly traditions fostered in Alexandria. The methods of textual criticism, the careful comparison of manuscripts, the creation of standardized editions, the development of grammar and philology. These techniques, honed by Alexandrian scholars like Zenodotus and Aristophanes of Byzantium, were crucial for the accurate transmission of ancient texts through the centuries. They taught the world how to be rigorous about its literary and intellectual inheritance. Even the often criticized book hunters employed by the Ptolemies, who, as a weird sidebar detail, were rumored to use all sorts of methods, from lavish purchases to outright trickery and perhaps even diplomatic pressure, to acquire scrolls, highlight how incredibly precious this knowledge was considered. These agents scoured the Mediterranean, sometimes making copies and returning originals, sometimes just taking what they could. It paints a picture of an almost desperate hunger for texts, a recognition that these fragile papyrus rolls held the keys to understanding the world. They were the original knowledge pirates, but for a good cause, mostly. Today, in the city of Alexandria, a new modern library stands, the Bibliothecas Alexandrina. Inaugurated in 2002, it's a stunning architectural achievement and a vibrant cultural center, explicitly designed to commemorate the spirit of its ancient predecessor. While it can never replace what was lost, it serves as a powerful symbol of Egypt's enduring commitment to learning and a global hub for dialogue and the exchange of ideas. It's a testament to the fact that the dream of a universal library, a place of shared human wisdom, is still very much alive. As we reflect on the long, complex story of the Library of Alexandria, what emerges is a profound sense of the fragility of knowledge. It can be painstakingly accumulated over centuries, only to be scattered by war, intolerance, or simple neglect. Yet it also highlights the incredible resilience of the human desire to learn, to understand, and to share. The library may be gone, its scrolls turned to dust or dispersed to the winds, but its ambition, its intellectual fervor, and the echoes of the wisdom it once held continue to inspire us. It stands as a timeless reminder of both our highest aspirations and our most lamentable failings, a monument to the endless and often perilous human quest for knowledge. Now, let the grand spectral image of that ancient library begin to dissolve in your mind. The endless rows of scrolls, the echoing halls, the faces of long dead scholars, all gently fade like ink on aging papyrus. The Mediterranean sun dips below the horizon, and the bustling city of Alexandria quiets down for the night. The search for lost wisdom can be laid to rest for now. There are no more debates to settle, no more crumbling texts to decipher, no more tales of destruction to mourn. Only the deep, abiding peace of a story that has found its conclusion. Feel the weight of history lift from your shoulders, replaced by a sense of quiet wonder at the enduring human spirit of inquiry. The pursuit of knowledge, like a gentle river, continues to flow, even if some of its grandest reservoirs have long since vanished. Allow your breath to be soft and easy, each exhalation carrying away any lingering tension, any stray thoughts. You are safe, you are comfortable, and the vast, silent library of the night sky watches over you. The whispers of forgotten wisdom have blended into the gentle murmur of the universe, a soothing lullaby inviting you into deep, restorative sleep. Sweet dreams,